excited to have you, Gustavo. Thank you so much for taking the time from your very busy schedule. I know you had a long day, and staying late with us makes it really extra special. Allow me the opportunity to make a brief introduction. I have already shared, and we have a classroom full of MBAs here. They are really excited and looking forward to your presentation. Gustavo is the Managing Director of Future Brand Hispanic America. Gustavo leads the company's activities across 5 offices: Buenos Aires, Santiago de Chile, Lima, Bogota, and Mexico City. He's a seasoned designer with a vast work experience in the professional field since 1982. He's also a professor at St. Andres University in Buenos Aires, where he leads the Prospective Lab. Before joining Future Brand in 2000, he was a General Creative Director in Argentina. He was a founding member and president of the Graphic Designers Association in Buenos Aires, as well as a corresponding member of the International Council for Design in 1987. Gustavo was part of a 5-group graduate program in the graphic design in architecture and design school at the University of Buenos Aires, where he's a pioneer in that respect. He was also a professor in the Master in Design Strategic Management. He is currently teaching a course in design at the University of San Andres in Buenos Aires in Argentina. Gustavo has led many successful place branding cases in almost every Latin American market, which really had a significant portfolio of future brand in Peru, Costa Rica, Argentina, Chile, Haiti. I know that his efforts with Peru have raised the ranking of Peru as a result of the Future Brand campaign for Peru. Very inspiring speaker, have spoken in so many conferences, and we are really up for a treat here of really having a leading figure and a thought leader in his own way from Future Brand. All the questions you can ask about South America, he's an expert in that, and he's, of course, a native speaker in Spanish. We are honored to have you, Gustavo, and thank you so much for being with us. On behalf of my students, we would like to extend you a very warm welcome here and looking forward to your presentation.
Wow. Thank you very much, Salah. And good evening to all of you, and please let me know if you can hear me well, right? All right. So, well, I can share my screen, right? Because at the end of the day, this is just, yeah, we've learned along the years that the only way we can just give a speech is with a PowerPoint presentation behind us. So this is it, right?
All right. Yes. Looks
okay. Good. Well, so just to coordinate a little bit timing, Salah, how's our timing? I mean, how long? I mean, I have no limit, so I can speak for hours. Not necessarily is going to be the case today, but you tell me how long do you want me to do it, and then of course opening the Q&A session, so you tell me.
Yeah, we are planning for an hour of presentation time or thereabout. and then a Q&A. If you prefer that the Q&A will be within the presentation, that's fine too, but I think we'll make our time more efficiently used by allowing you the control of the podium to present, and we'll have a Q&A at the end of that. So,
yeah, I think that's best. But if if the students can just take notes or whatever in the middle of the presentation, so you can ask me later, and we can, you know, in that specific case, we can just come back to the slide or to, I don't remember if slides have numbers. Well, not necessarily, but you know, try to remember it in any case, or the case or the specific concept, and I'll try to come back to that. So, well, good evening once more. Thank you, Salah, for your invitation. I'm very happy and honored to be now giving a speech. I've already, as I mentioned to you, I also gave a speech, but in Spanish, for a colleague of yours here in the GWU. His name is Andoni Aldecoa. He's Basque, and he actually is he's working at the national television station in the Basque country, and I met him when I was giving some consultancy for the Basque country, and he invited me to speak a little bit about these kind of topics as well. But it was in Spanish, so for me it was easier, and so I hope that you can understand my English. And in any case, if there's something that it's not necessarily right, or the concept is not totally understood, just stop me and I'll try to express myself in a better way. One important thing about branding, and you know, one of the ideas or guidelines that Salah suggested me to talk is about branding in Latin America, but oriented to country branding or place branding or tourism branding, destination branding in general. So one of the first slides that I always show when I have the opportunity to give a speech, specifically not to students, but more in more occasions to public officers or just business people, is this, and it's because when we say branding, what normally comes to mind is these kind of brands, you know, brands that are representing corporations or very well-known global products or platforms or social networks, as you can see if you just browse this slide. But I always like to show how I understand branding through a very ancient example that I had the chance to be in front of about 10 or 12 years ago, probably, yes, around 10 to 12 years ago. We were hired, we actually won a public bidding to create Brand Peru, as Professor Hassan has mentioned. And so part of the process was to visit different areas, different zones of the country. So we were a crowded team, about 8 to 10 people. So we divided into different areas, and I had the opportunity to visit what's called the northern route. It's in Spanish is La Ruta Moche, which means the Moche route. And Moche is the name of some peoples that were living in the northern part of Peru. And they created some ritual monuments called huacas in Spanish. in Spanish or not in Spanish necessarily. It's part of an ancient language called Quechua. And Huaca is a place where the community congregated, and actually they were all the time creating and building the monument. It was a kind of a constant building activity, and it was useful as a marketplace, or marketplace meaning literally the place where the market was located, and also as religious center, and all the families that were living around were actually offering the produce of their hands, and those products were these bricks you are looking at. And each brick had a sign on it. And when I asked the guide, the tour guide that were helping us to understand the history, and by the way, we are talking about something that was built 1,000 to 500 years before Christ. This is a very ancient case. I've asked her, and she said, well, each family was doing the best of their efforts to provide the best brick, the best possible brick, if you want, to build the Huaca, because the Huaca was once more a representation of God, of different gods they were actually adoring, and and actually, as they were putting their signs, their identification for each of the families onto the brick, that meant that they were literally offering the best of their efforts, and so it had to be excellent. And there was a question of pride, in each of the bricks they were offering to the gods through being part of the Huaca's build process. So I always refer to this as one of the first cases, probably the most ancient one that I was in direct contact with, of branding, because at the end of the day, this is what the essence of branding is. We try to sell something, and if we want to try to sell our car, we are probably going to clean it before. And if we want to sell our house, we'll probably, put the house in order and just take the best of the possible pictures of it. So we are always trying to represent the product of our hands, or the product of our minds, of our work, or whatever, which is related with what we do, in the best possible way, and we put a brand on it. That's why we understand that brands are an inevitable link or inevitable connection between a product or a service with a consumer or a user, an institution, an audience, or even a country, destination, a place, and the potential visitors, investors, and people willing to buy things or products from. So that's the way we understand brands. And along the years, we've also understood, I'm a graphic designer, but when we worked before joining Future Brand many years ago, literally I started the relationship with Future Brand in 2000, and we met the company in 1998. But I work in design since 1983. So a long time ago, almost 40 years or 38. And I remember that the first time I met Future Brand, I then understood that there was something beyond just design as we understand itself. And I always liked the English version of the concept of design. And I'll tell you why, because we in Spanish, and this is a very significant difference, in Spanish, when you, not necessarily now, but you know, some 20 years ago or so, when you look in the dictionary, the meaning of the word diseño, which is design in English, in Spanish, the first of the entries was draft, something like that, was draft or drawing, you know, like something related not to an idea, but to something done with the hands or sketch. And in English, the Oxford Dictionary says first, as a first entry of the meaning of design, as a mental plan. So that's the main idea, that design is not just a visual representation or an industrial representation or just a way that something takes form or shape of, but mainly a plan, an idea, but inevitably as well having a form or a shape. So when we represented that in a formula, if you want, we said the best way to say that is saying that we have one intangible axis or one intangible health and another tangible one, meaning that we have, and this is something I love to say to my students, that there's always form and content, there's always purpose and experience, there's always strategy and design, there's always reputation and identity. So there's always two parts. It's a combination of two parts. And I always say that it's very important that one is as important as the other, because I'm not sure if you feel the same, but there's a kind of preference towards the reputation part of this formula. I mean, the content part is always, there's, at least here in my country, in my region, there's an idea related to the fact that it doesn't matter what the shape of the thing has or what the form is. What's important is the content, and you know, if it's not necessarily the best way to represent it, you don't necessarily are just betraying, if you want, the content. I mean, the content is the content, it's the king, and it doesn't matter too much how is it represented. And I don't think that. I always say to my students, form and content are both has the same level of importance. And that's something that whoever who works with branding, you gotta understand that. I mean, it's a very important starting point, that reputation and identity have the same level of importance. And once more, as you can see, we can just have a lot of synonyms to reputation. As I mentioned before, strategy, content, the intangible part, and identity, experience, form, shape, etc. Just to make it one step forward, when we talk about reputation, we understand that the reputation is the consequence of the promise and the performance. What you are gonna do, what you're gonna say that you are gonna do, and how you are going to do it, how you do it. Meaning, if, for instance, if I say that I am going to be very punctual, I'm always gonna be on a sharp time, and then I always come late classes or to meetings, my reputation as a very formal person is not necessarily going to be the best. And that's why it's very important to understand, what can I promise? What's the level of the promise my brand can offer? And of course, depending on how far that reputation ideal is, that's going to be the perception the others will have about my brand. And on the other hand, and on the other half, identity is based on differentiation and consistency, meaning that at some point we have to find somehow the difference, what makes us unique. There's always something that makes us unique. I mean, we have to, just dig more, or try to find deeper, in a deeper way, where is the essence of what we want to represent visually, verbally, through different senses. And once we find it, just trying to have consistency in the way we connect with the other people, meaning our audiences, our target audiences, that of course we'll have to identify before. This probably can sound to you like very basic, but believe me, every day I have in front of mine a client or a student or a person, a friend that I have to explain what branding is. I have the chance to talk to them in this way, and it's very insightful, it's very clear, and it's very challenging at the same time. The perfection doesn't exist, and this is kind of an ideal representation of what brands and branding are. And I always say at the end of this slide that if I show this on top of a photo, of a picture, of a representation of a lot of people, it's because brands don't live on officers or executives' desks. Actually, brands live within people's minds, and that's the most important thing to understand, that it doesn't matter what I think my brand is. What matters, what really matters, is what my audiences think my brand represents for them. So and once more, having said that, it's very interesting to see how some clients or some people in charge, managers, marketing directors or communication people from different companies, institutions, products, etc., how convinced they are that that everybody would understand what they want to do with communications, and why they would learn what they want to say. And we have not so many empty spaces in our very crowded minds. I mean, and literally today, and probably because of the influence of social networks and the internet attacks and the screens, etc., it's very difficult to find a space, to just excel. Excel meaning to be above the horizon, or to be above the average communication cloud. So, well, I'm sorry for just extending myself too much in this very first intro. On country branding, as Salah has said before, we've worked a lot, and it's interesting how the same principles that we can apply to branding in general can be applied as well to countries. But I'm very respectful of that word that says that the country is a different thing. I mean, it's not just to say it in a better way, I don't like when people or when some people say that to sell a country is like to sell French fries or you know, just orange juice. No, no, not at all. I mean, we have to consider a lot of different things, and well, this is part of our experience along the time, literally in the last 20 years or so. And as part of our own way to work, we aren't just focusing our our work on just doing the things, but also we like to study and explore the audiences. So we were doing these reports and indexes since 2005 onwards, and we call it Future Brand Index or Country Brand Index or Future Brand Country Brand Index, so many different names. But in the specific case of Latin America, we have created our own, which is called Country Brand Report Latin America. And the reason why we did it, it's because the general rankings that the company was doing along the years don't necessarily include the whole group of Latin American countries, and it's just because of GDP size. You know, globally, when we have to create one of these rankings, we have to select a threshold. I mean, we can't just have the 200 plus countries that the world has. So we just cut at some point. The last reports are cut at 75 because 75 countries represent something like 97% of the global GDP. Of course, with the United States representing between 20 or 22%. So imagine that it doesn't have any sense to have a global ranking just to express with the, let's say, 120 or 130 other countries, only 3 or 4% of the global GDP. That's why when we then create the Latin American version, what we do is taking the whole group, the full group of Latin American countries, and we just concentrated them into 20, not including the Caribbean countries, but at least basically most of the Spanish-speaking countries and Brazil, that most of times is #1. By the way, Argentina and Brazil are playing soccer football right now, and I won't try to sneak any preview before ending this class. Another study that we performed a few years ago was Made In report that had the contribution of Dr. Salah Hassan, as you can see. So it's part of the link that we have and the relationship we have with the Professor Hassan in the past. And Made In report is a very significant piece of investigation because when we work with countries, we are not just creating a brand to have more tourists coming in, but also more buyers of our products coming in, or just our products going out and try to thrive abroad. The way we understand the functioning of the understanding and the relationship between countries or destinations and audiences is through, once more, the way we understand it, is through this so-called HDM, or hierarchical decision model, that has 7 steps, probably more oriented to tourism, as you can see, but starting from what's called awareness, and believe it or not, and particularly in the case of Latin America, there's a lot of countries that nobody knows that they exist. And of course, we being in the same continent right now, but in very different places, but if I say Nicaragua or Ecuador or Panama, it's very probable that you know what I'm talking about. But if you go to China, or Southeast Asia or Africa, or in some places in the United States or Europe, they don't necessarily recognize or have any idea of the existence of these countries that I mentioned. And this is once more a question of size, a question of history. And as in one of my presentations, I also like to say, we have to understand that we living in America meaning the Americas, we have a delay in the building of brand nations and reputations, like of about 20 centuries or so, or between 10 to 20 centuries, meaning that the existence of these countries is very recent. For instance, only 2 months ago, most of Central American countries were celebrating their 200 years anniversary. What happened, by the way, in the States like 40 years ago or so, in 1976. In our case here in Argentina, it was in 2010, but we are around a 2 centuries old group of countries. And when you contrast that against France, Italy, or China, or Turkey, those are very old countries, or older countries than us. And that implies that there's at least one first very important step already won or given, which is the fact that you at least know what I'm talking about. But if I sometimes say, as we are now working for the Guatemala, the country, we know that it's sometimes even difficult to pronounce the name of the country. So it's a first challenge that we here in Latin America have. And so after going through first step awareness, we go into familiarity, which means how familiar are you with my country? How what else can you say? Is there any additional idea that comes to your mind when you listen to the name of my country? Is there any memory, any related episode, or anything that you've learned, seen, etc.? For instance, one interesting thing that I always remind is that when we were doing the, I don't remember which year it was exactly, but let's say it was the 2011 or 2012 version of the country brand index, we realized that there was a very important leap between Chile's position between one version, one edition, and the next one. The country literally jumped 19 positions in the general ranking. And the reason was because at the time we're having the research, the field research, meaning the moment or the space of time that you use to go and ask the audiences, you know, what they understand by, or what they are, well, if they are aware of the existence of a country, how familiar they are, and etc. What's our process to do this kind of reports? And well, at that point, the country was passing through a very particular situation. I don't know if you remember that many years ago, like once more, like 10 years ago or so, there was the so-called the miners' crisis. 33 people working in a mine were kept behind the soil, and they were trapped into the mine, and only after a month or so they were able to be saved alive, the 33 of them, thanks to a joint effort. And the moment of having everybody going up to the surface was broadcasted globally, and I think that the global audience was more than 1 billion people. And at that time, we were doing the field research for that year's edition of the Country Brand Index. And that was the simple reason. Everybody knew that at least there was a country called Chile. Because before that, probably nobody knew, I wouldn't say nobody, but I mean, a lot of people didn't necessarily know that a country existed. So that's as simple as that is how we can be or not aware of the existence of a country or aware of the existence of a brand. When we finally go to the third step, which is associations, we start opening up the concepts the country has and the country represents, and this is probably the richest part of the studies that we do, and we divide once more between experience and purpose, divide this wheel in 6 different dimensions, 2 axes, 6 dimensions, 22 attributes, and I won't go one by one of the attributes because it's too detailed, but I would say that the 3 purpose components are value, system, quality of life, and business potential, and the other 3 are heritage and culture, tourism, and made in. As you see, made in is an important part of the studies we do. And the reason why we put experience on one hand and purpose on the other is because what you can experience or what's related, what you can touch, what you can feel is or can be understood and you know, just researched through understanding made in, tourism, and heritage and culture. And when you talk about value system, quality of life, and business potential, you are actually talking about future, about purpose, values, the more intangible part of the equation, as I said before. We always say that the purpose of a country brand is to position itself in the minds of potential tourists, traders, and investors. And as you see, it's an interesting mix and not an easy one. And we always have to have in mind a very clear approach and methodology involving all key actors from the beginning. I have the very fresh experience because I am right now leading a country brand experience, a country brand process in Guatemala. And it's not a secret. We don't normally talk about the projects we are doing, but in this particular case, the process was so complicated. I mean, before being awarded with it, that I had to be talking in front of different audiences in person in Guatemala. So it was actually my first trip after pandemic was going to Guatemala, and the second one as well. So I just came back 2 weeks ago. And so I appeared in the news. I was interviewed by, different newspapers, etc. and we also started to interview different key people in the country, starting with the president that we interviewed as well, and different ministers, different key people, business people, the people from the culture, trade, etc. So many different audiences related to investment, tourism, trade, and culture as well. And as we always say, that the commitment of all stakeholders is key, because when you talk about a country brand, you are always touching some sensitivity, which is not necessarily as if you were doing, rebranding of any other company or institution. So we are touching something which is very significant or important. But I always just try to calm everybody's down, saying, at the end of the day, we are just creating a brand, and it's not the new anthem or the new flag or the new shield or coat d'armes. We are actually creating a marketing tool. That's it. Country brands are marketing tools, as all brands are. I'm not necessarily aligned with the idea that brands will transform our lives, or that they want to, just be part of our styles. I mean, we as individuals, we have to control our lives, and we have to select which brands, in any case, will represent us better. And so this is where I try to say to clients, in this case, country clients, and we take care of saying that to each of these different stakeholders. We try to connect with public officers, media, opinion leaders, business people, associations, politicians, private and public companies, etc., to say, look, what you are going to have after the process is completed is a tool. It's something that you will be able to use. It's not just something that you will necessarily put on your heart or on your arm as a tattoo. However, we've seen people just tattooing country brands, and I will try to show some of the examples. And the reason why we can develop a country brand, it's because we need to build a global competitive advantage. And once more, the idea of having something global, it's because limit is the world. I mean, the world is the limit. And that actually goes for each of the markets, or each of the countries, and for each of the markets the countries want to reach. And once more, focusing that on Latin America, we have this sense that when I say we, is we people living in Latin America. We have this idea that the rest of the world is actually providing for more wealth and providing for more buying capabilities, and tourists actually come from Europe, US, Asia, and we are not necessarily a region that creates tourists or creates buyers for products, but on the contrary, what we can do is actually receiving buyers, receiving tourists, and definitely the region needs more influx than the contrary. So that's why we need to create a global competitive advantage for each of the countries, regions, products, etc. At the same time, talent attraction is key. And I would say that now is one of the top 3 goals of each of the Latin American countries. And it doesn't necessarily have the best result, meaning that attracting talent depends not only on what you can do with your brand, but also, and I would say, first of all, with more sensitive factors such as security, safety, quality of life, and so on. However, there's a lot of different countries in the region trying to sell themselves as the best destination. But, you know, once more, there's always a ghost around, and that ghost is the ghost of, you know, difficult places, not so safe, our past, you know, Netflix series showing Colombian very angry macho men attacking or, you know, just threatening people around, and it's part of a stereotype. And that's one of the points here. Correcting stereotypes is one of the key ideas that a country brand will have to face. And then expressing a central and unique idea, a visionary one, a consistent one, and at the end of the day, being a source of economic value. When we work with brands, with country brands, and when we have to discuss that with the internal stakeholders, we try to sell the idea of having a country brand process through these 3 factors. Synergy, because we think that concentrating all brand efforts into just one is very efficient, and it's a smarter way to, you know, to promote yourself. And once more, I would say, and I have some study around there, that Latin America only concentrates between 3 to 5% of global attention, meaning that, of course, there are, you know, much more news around US, Europe, Asia than what's happening in Latin America, that, by the way, represents a tiny part of the global GDP. Once more, if you measure it through the economic factors. Integration, because it could be a country brand, once more, it could be a blending or binding element between public and private sector. For instance, right now in Guatemala, we found that there are different country promotion activities, or at some point country brand exercises done by private sector, because of the fact that there is no global official country brand. And so when there's a lack of such a marketing tool, private sector tries to make their best and tries to, you know, just communicates to the rest of the world. So the factor that the existence of one and only country brand can concentrate and integrate both needs. And self-awareness, that's specifically on purpose put in 3rd place, because it's building self-confidence to the country itself and to the people living in the country, because sometimes it's useful, but once more, the idea of promoting your country abroad is basically what a country brand has to work for. So just to summarize it, this would be the ideal, you know, the ideal formula, right? Once more, tourism, trade, investment, culture times experience on purpose. Probably in the field of investment attraction, the country brand will have a lower degree of incidence given the rational nature of the decision-making process. This is particularly oriented to investment attraction, where I would say that it's the only dimension that has a more significant component of the rational decision-making process, because in the other fields, once more tourism or even exports and culture, of course, it's much more emotional. This is too technical. I think just very quickly going through, I would say that you have, on one hand, different factors to consider that are related to political measures, how open your country is, how regulated the business making is, how regulated the labor market, and what are the financial market conditions, and the other factors related to the country itself, like infrastructure, market size, economic and geographical distance, political and social stability, and availability of natural resources. This is a very technical part of what you can, or what you have to have in mind. For instance, starting to work in Guatemala, we learned that, believe it or not, Guatemala is the center of America, really. So literally, when you go, if you just draw a line going from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego here in Argentina, the midpoint is exactly in Guatemala. So that's a nice insight, to take into consideration when we are going to work in their country brand. In each of the processes, we have two main moments. One is planning, the second is execution. We have to plan, including investment, tourism, trade, and culture. We have to plan, understand with each of their stakeholders, analyze, and finally diagnose the current situation. We start doing the creative work, meaning, creating ideas, creating positioning, creating designs, creating verbal guidelines, tone of voice, personality traits, etc. Then going to testing, internal and external, and this process finally ends with creative implementation or deployment into guides, into manuals, and so on. And then the execution moment starts, and you then have to go to formalize, that officially the brand represents the country, socialize it internally with the main stakeholders I already mentioned in one of the past slides, launch the brand internally and externally, and then managing it, hopefully through different years. So far, this is the theory.
I think they're interested in the cases now.
All right. Well, so hopefully, I hope that some of you will know what I'm showing right now. And this was was selected 8 years ago or 9 years ago as one of the 7 new wonders of the world. And it's Machu Picchu. It's a beautiful place. I've been there twice. You really feel the energy when you are there. It's an amazing place in the middle of the mountains, of the Andean mountains, in a very inaccessible point at some time, then finally discovered not so long ago. and it very well represents a very significant ancient culture that had some incredible levels of intelligence and quality and civilization, the Incas. And as I like to say as well, it's probable that the Machu Picchu is the anchor store, the entrance gate for the shopping mall that Peru can be or can represent. But it's important to have an anchor store. Imagine that 80% of the tourists coming into Peru visit Machu Picchu. The picture I showed to you at the beginning is not from Machu Picchu, it's from a totally different place in the northern part of Peru, which is as interesting as Machu Picchu is. But Machu Picchu has a lot of publicity, it's much more known, and it's very beautiful as well, of course. And the whole infrastructure in that part of the country to the south is much more developed than in the other parts. When we won this project, which was actually our first significant country brand project, that was in 2011. I'm sorry, we won it in 2009, in 2009, and it took us like 10 months to complete it, but it took another 12 months to be launched. And of course, political reasons, that's the only answer to the question that you were necessarily posing. And through that time, we interviewed people from different sectors, associations, companies, etc. We also performed surveys to Peruvians living abroad or the Peruvian diaspora, to visitors, and also worked with around 25 local professionals that formed a kind of a counterpart committee that actually was our echo during the whole process. So we found a country, Peru, that has a lot of good things to communicate after having passed through very difficult years at the end of the last century. Difficult years meaning that there was a lot of crime, corruption, unsafety, human rights violations, and so on. I can say, a long list of not so good things, but that was actually until a moment when the country finally decided, thanks to coordination of different forces, they decided to, just recreate itself and rebuild the political system. And they started to grow. They started to grow economically, socially. They still have a lot to achieve. But when you look at the macroeconomic numbers, you see that the country doesn't seem to be in Latin America, literally. I mean, it has a very stable currency. The economic is always growing. Inflation is at low rates. Inclusion is getting better. Still, owing those questions related to poverty and to the GI factor, the inequality is still high, but it's going through the right path and integrated to the world. It's probably one of the Latin American countries that has done more free trade agreements with different countries in Europe, with US, with Asia. So it's a very good way to show how a country can evolve and connect with the rest of the world. So we had a lot of concepts around, and we created these that are in Spanish, but are like platforms to develop concept platforms that could be the main idea to communicate to the rest of the world. Then we finally agreed on 3 brand, sorry, my finger was faster, 3 brand pillars that were multifaceted, specialist, and captivating. And believe it or not, this was created in 2009, was launched in 2011, and I have heard in a conference I was invited to give a speech last Friday in the so-called Alpaca Summit. Alpaca is one of the finest fibers that the country produces, and we also created the brand Alpaca from Peru. And the person from the Ministry of Commercial Affairs, he said that we still guide our communications with these 3 pillars: multifaceted, specialist, and captivating. So it was almost an emotion for me to listen to this guy to say that they still respect these 3 pillars on each of the communication, because the only way to get an idea doing its work, its job, is to being consistent, is through being consistent. So with these 3 ideas in mind, and after having explored all the possibilities, the very rich visual culture of the country had, we finally presented the brand in this way. I'm not sure if sound coming from my computer is okay, so I'll just let me once more disconnect 1 minute and reconnect, including sound. I'm back, so I'm gonna play the video. So this brand was a very interesting and shocking new way to express what Peru was and what Peru could be, you know. That's why we are very happy of having contributed to this, that so far is an iconic brand for many, you know, practitioners and public officers and people studying the country brand discipline. I just found myself, for instance, I was 2 years ago in Madrid, and I opened the book on branding, and I was surprised that this was taken as one of the best examples. And probably it has to be with the fact that it's very easy to communicate something through visual, but also taking advantage of the fact that Peru is a very short word at the same time. So what we did was we then selected, for instance, we have the opposite situation in Guatemala. Guatemala is a very long word, and Peru is a very short one. So it's very easy to take, 4 letters and, just play with them. And that's my design part, designer side. And what we did with our team was to, besides the fact that we created that, it's not just a sticker, it's a piece of a more complex communication and design system that includes a specific typeface. This, what you can see on top left is I cannot move my cursor. Anyway, the typeface, a typeface that existed was retouched by the designer who created it, and added some glyphs, some specific components of each of the characters that were somehow resembling the idea of the spiral that's part of the logo. And the logo has three curves, 3 wheels, and it's because the ancient cultures of the country always represent the world in 3 levels, which is the underground level, the soil or the ground, and heaven, representing the underground world, meaning the world, of the deaf people, of the, former souls, our current living world, and the world of gods. So that's why there's just three lines. And with that idea of having lines around the images and what's represented through photography, we created this system, this lines and graphic component system that relates to each of the images, respecting, of course, a color palette and a specific layout, and so on. But as I mentioned, it's not just important to show a good system or a good concept scheme, but also to launch the brand in a proper way, to manage the brand in a correct fashion. And this is a good example because at the same time, literally at the same time, well, not literally, but I would say that in a window of 48 hours, the brand was launched in Lima by the minister. It's the commercial affairs minister and tourism minister at the same time. It's the same ministry, surrounded by different representatives from the chambers of commerce and industry and so on. And the day before, the new brand was revealed at the Berlin tourism fair, and the day after, the economy minister was with the 20 most important business people, Peruvian business people, in the so-called Peru Day 2011 at Wall Street, opening the round, the famous ringing the bell ceremony, and of course trying to attract or start attracting investments with the new brand, just framing all the economic effort. This launch immediately received a lot of good resonance on media, and also led us to a path of creating other brands or sub-brands as part of the whole branding system. And it started with different sub-brands or tourist routes and so on. And then it ended with alpaca, textiles, and coffees, 3 of the products the country has. They are very committed to provide food to the world. So the brand Food from Peru is part of the system, including the same, as you can see, the same graphic style. This is alpaca, this is textiles, and this is coffees, the last of the brands we created. And if you have the chance to go to Lima, or if you have the chance to at least just stop or has a stopover at Lima airport, you will see that this brand is all over. It's all over, literally. I mean, you can just buy t-shirts, caps, mugs, books, stickers, whatever you can. I'm sorry.
These masks.
Yes, yes, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's really interesting, and when we measured the same year, we launched it in March, and then in November we just had these results from a public survey, and it's amazing. It's amazing how is this brand so well received. We also worked for another country, not so large, not so old, but a very important one, at least in the region, which is Central America, which is Costa Rica. Costa Rica had a very good and very healthy tourism brand, which was this one, Costa Rica No Artificial Ingredients. But the request from the country's officers was, okay, it's a very nice brand, it's very well known, but just on the tourism sector. So we need a brand that represents us better in all the combined efforts, communication efforts we want to have. And so we created this idea of essential, because the country, and once more, the importance of understanding what the country has to offer and what the country represents. And I remember myself presenting this to at that time, the president of the country. Her name is Laura Chinchilla, saying, look, Mrs. President, I think that you are the only president in the world that has the authority to stand in front of your colleagues in the UN Assembly, for instance, and saying, if we have to send to the rest of the world or to the rest of the universe a representation of what the best of our civilization and the best of our world or planet is, I think that our country, or my country, is the best option. And why is it that way? Well, because it's within its very tiny surface compared, of course, against the US, Brazil, or other immense countries. We have, I think they have like 15 different microclimates, or 18. I mean, in a very tiny place, they have a lot of biodiversity. They protect 3/4, 75% of their area, geographical area, is protected, is nature protected. They have no army. It's the oldest and most stable democracy in America. It has public education system, and it's like all the planet has for good, but in a very tiny size. So we said, this is an essence. It's like when you get a perfume, the essence is actually the concentration of all the aroma the perfume can provide. but in a very tiny size. So that's why we said this idea of essential. And at the same time, essential is basic, and it somehow reflects the current, or the at that point current, it was done in 2013, tourism trend of going back to basics, to essential. You know, not getting impressed by big hotel infrastructures or big travel announcement, but more specifically to be more in contact with nature, with the essence of what with the essential things of life, you know, nature, human contact, care, friendship, and they are very friendly. I mean, the country is very friendly. Everything there is really very nice. So we all right. No, I was muted. I was muting myself for some reason. So we created this brand, Essential Costa Rica, and it's part of once more of a system that's related to a customer journey. And for customer journey, we understand that all different touch points must be under the same idea or under the same visual and verbal expression. So we have internal communications, digital platforms, campaigns, outdoors campaigns, presence in this case in tourism fairs, but also in industrial fairs, and they are also licensing their brand for the use in different lines of business. And last but not least, they won in, I don't have the picture here, and unfortunately I have it in another in another presentation, but they won the best country brand award in City Nation Place, which is a conference that takes place every November. Actually, last one was last week. And in 2019, that was the last one that was in presence. They won the best of the world place brand or country brand. Finally, and just to have some space for Q&A, as I said, this was probably one of the most challenging cases that we have to face because of different things. Haiti, this was funded by the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, was done basically in French, with my team and myself speaking French and English, thanks to the fact that they are at some point bilingual. But it's a kind of a difficult case because we, once more, we were part of an IDB program that included a lot of help given to Haitian companies to be elected as BPOs, and part of, you know, economic chains to try to make the country being recovered. But this was actually the picture we had to face at the beginning. And it's complicated, you know, to go from this situation to a healthy or interesting or seductive one. It's been very difficult. This was the government house after 2010 earthquake. So we work with IDB within a program, and this program included, and I'm sorry, it's in French because we had to work in French, as I said, but the first phase was discovery and diagnosis. Second was brand strategy. Third was brand creation. Fourth, communication guides. Fifth was brand launch, and sixth, brand management. So we worked with them, with their public and private sector. I met President Jovenel Moïse in person. The same one that was killed a few months ago. This was the challenge, how to change the perception of being an assisted country to a nation with many opportunities that can be economically enhanced. So we created this idea that says forger des opportunités solides, which means forging solid opportunities. Because forging, or just building with their own hands, is a way they can do things. They don't have a lot of infrastructure. They are a very virgin country at some point, very organic. There's not so many chemicals attacking the flora. And when we had to once more create the idea that must represent and express the brand in a visual way, we try to represent these factors, these pillars: expressivity, opportunity, transversality, if the word exists, and complexity. And we also explored the ancient cultures of the island. It's an island, by the way, that's shared with Dominican Republic, but the Taino peoples that were in the northern part of the island, they had these typical terminations, these typical endings of each of their handcrafts and drawings and cultural designs. So we found it interesting as part of what we finally created in this way. And the brand has a particularity that it's in 2 languages. Actually, it's in Occidental characters, as you can see: French, English, and Creole. Creole, they don't like us to say that Creole is a form of French. It's actually a different language based somehow on French, but they say Haiti in this way, and they write the name of the country in this way. One interesting thing to mention is that if you show this to a Haitian, I am not sure if there's any Haitian in the audience right now, but if there's one, they will recognize a voodoo sign, which is in the middle of the letter A. And voodoo has very bad press, but it's a way of life of all the Haitian people. So we learned that. And once more, you have to understand the audience, you have to understand the client, in this case, the country, you have to understand their reality. And, the A has a symbol inside that's called VV, which is part of the voodoo sign system. And it's the meaning for good. It's like a good spirit or something like that. So there is a kind of a hidden message, a good one into the brand. And then we created the whole system as usual. being able to live in the digital world as well, in the printed and communications world. We also planned the way the brand was going to be launched, and it was finally launched in a very humble way. The only problem is that, unfortunately, because of their political instability, the brand is not so well implemented so far. I'm actually lost contact with them, so I'm not sure if they are doing it in the right way. Just for who is interested, Brazil and Argentina has ended into a 0-0 draw. And finally, my own formula of the 3 C's, which is understanding that a successful country branding has to have one significant concept. That concept to have consensus among the audiences and the stakeholders, particularly, that are going to communicate it and to use it, and also have the commitment from those stakeholders to use it along the years or along a long time, you know, as it happened in the case of Peru, and as it happens actually in the case of Costa Rica, and other examples I have to give, and not so many others that are not necessarily following the same behavior. But always having in mind that if you think that the brand is a curtain that covers the reality, that's not probably the best way. Ideally, the curtain should be something that when you just, you know, discover the reality is similar to the curtain. I mean, it's not necessarily the same exactly, but, you know, ideally brands, you know, have to work in more as bridges, you know, than masks. We have to bear in mind that the more pure, the more realistic the reality is, the better the brand will be, and the better the brand will have their work done. So that's it so far. I hope that there's still some time for Q&A. I'm sorry for just extending myself so long.
Thank you, Gustavo. This is amazing presentation. You really took us on a phenomenal tour of Latin America, and we really learned that the brand is not a curtain, a brand is a mirror of what actually is all about. Thank you so much. And I think there are some questions. Yeah? Jack?
Yeah. So one question I had was to your last point about needing to be authentic and the brand not, you know, kind of covering up. My question is how do you balance what a country wants to be, that like aspirational view of themselves and what they want their brand to stand for, with a reality that doesn't always match? So I even think in the United States, right, there's this concept of it's a land of opportunity. Like I think we've all heard that, and yet you know, we know that's not necessarily true for everyone who comes to the United States. So I guess my question is, how do you balance reality with aspiration in a brand for a country?
Yeah, well, that's why I mentioned at some point of the presentation that you have to balance the way the promise can be shaped, and you know, sometimes it's not so grateful to say to you know, what's going to happen with us. For instance, in the case of Guatemala, I know that I will probably have to be the person in charge of giving not so good news to them, mainly what's related to, you know, a history of not so very good behavior in the past, for instance. So one has to think of what how much you can stretch that promise, and it's always a challenging thing, because one always thinks that one is nicer and, you know, slimmer, taller, etc., than reality. But, you know, sometimes that's our job, you know, to communicate that. And the good news is that when we just show what others say, that's end of story thing. You know, that's why we include research in all our processes. And when the researcher comes and they say what they have to say, that's the truth. And that's another important part of that comment, is that we never research with our own stuff. I mean, we always hire a third-party researcher or research company, because we want to show to the client that we are not biased, or that we are not involved in any interpretation of the other audience's thinking. You know, I hope that this answers at some point the question.
One question, if I may, here, and it's a big challenge. I'm sure you have hinted for it throughout your presentation. The stewardship of the brand, when it comes to, you know, for a corporate brand, a product brand, you have the brand management team. How about for a country? How did you, and you have hinted for some of the geopolitical factors and dynamics and delaying the launching of a campaign, or how the stability in the case of Costa Rica have been very helpful. To what extent, you know, having a branding board in place as the organizing body, as the, you know, sort of the brand management team that assumes the stewardship, to what extent is it more in bed with government versus more in bed with the private sector, or with NGOs, or with an agency? You know, what models do you see have been working when it comes to the stewardship of the country brand?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. The models we have faced, or we have been in relationship with along these years, have been very I mean, different. Each one has its pros and cons. Probably the two best ones that I found were Chile and Costa Rica. Chile has so-called it's called Image Chile Foundation. It's called Fundación Imagen de Chile. That is a public/private institution, literally comprised of the leaders of the commercial chambers, like, for instance, the Export Association, Fruit Producers, Wines of Chile, and so on. And on the other hand, the Ministry of Culture, Ministry of Tourism, Ministry of Commercial Affairs, External Affairs, and so on. The honorific president of the institution is the External Affairs Minister. And that's good because it has its own economic turnaround, so they don't depend on the government, but they behave themselves in a way, in a public way. I mean, it's called autonomous entity under public law, something like that. I don't know how to translate it into English in a proper way, but it's that's the idea. I mean, it's not a public division or a government division. On the other hand, but in a very good way as well, in the case of Costa Rica, there's a so-called interinstitutional committee, country brand committee that's that includes, if I'm not wrong, 6 different ministries or institutions. The government house or the presidential house, tourism, it's like the tourism ministry, commercial, external trade ministry as well, investment in the investment agency, and youth, and I don't remember which other one, but they are all concentrated in a same, you know, they have representatives in the same place around the same table, and they interact with the private sector all the time. I mean, there is no representative from the private sector in that table, but at least they really follow some guidelines, and once more, they haven't been impacted by the government changes. And of course, there are bad examples. We've created the brand for Michoacán, which is it's a state in Mexico. It was launched 2 years ago or so. Yes, 2.5 years ago. And I knew that last month, when the governor was replaced, the new tourism minister of the state just changed the brand and reversed the decision that the other tourism minister took, and, you know, put everything back to the former brand, you know. So that's not a very good behavior, but that's it. So what can I do? So examples there's a lot of them, but the best ones are, for me, the ones that include the private sector. Yeah. And that's what we are trying to do in Guatemala. We are proposing to have the private sector from the beginning being heard.
Very good, very good. Gustavo, thank you so much. This is an amazing presentation. Thank you for your time. It's very late time now, your time.
No worries.
Thank you, and we'll be in touch, and we'll look forward to engaging you with us, and hopefully seeing you on campus when things open up. Thank you so much. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll connect with you soon. Thank you, sir.
Thanks to you, and thanks to you. Thank you very much. Thanks for your attention, and we'll be in touch for sure, just to talk about country branding, destination branding, or product and corporate branding as well. That's the other part of the story.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for your time.
Bye.